My efforts to continue to look into my children's eyes and see them, I'm rewarded by the precious moments of shared presence, a recognition of the love that binds us together. I believe that the heart of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, is truly about God's compassion. Well, first he needs self-awareness. He needs to know what areas of himself are closed off, delusional, or not pure, so that he can let God bring compassion to him for his shortcomings. And he needs to understand the experience of his fellow people. He needs to understand of our ability to bring blessing into the world, and that we may be raising children who lack the skills that they need to live meaningful and fulfilling lives. We say that we turn to our phones when we're bored, and we often find ourselves bored because we have become so free for society. In solitude, we find ourselves. We prepare ourselves to come to conversation with something to say that's authentic. When we are secure in ourselves, we are able to listen to other people and really hear what they have to say. And then, through conversation with others, to distract me from myself. And this is where the virtuous cycle breaks down. If I struggle to pay attention to myself, then what am I able to bring to other people? I know that my ability to empathize with others, my ability to put myself in their shoes, comes from an understanding of my own. Sometimes when things clear away and you're not watching and you're in your car and you start going, oh, here it comes, I'm alone, and life in this moment is tremendously sad. And that's why we text and drive. Pretty much 100% of people are texting and driving, and they're killing and murdering each other. So I pulled over and I just cried. I cried so much it was beautiful. Sadness is poetic. You're lucky to live sad moments. And then I had happy feelings, because when you let yourself have sad feelings, your body has like antibodies that come rushing in to meet the sad feelings. But because we never want to feel that first feeling, it's the capacity for solitude that allows a person to reach out to others and see them as separate and independent. This makes the capacity for solitude essential to the development of empathy. If you are comfortable with yourself, you can put yourself in someone else's place. These days, we may mistake time on the internet for solitude. It isn't. In fact, solitude is challenged by our habit of turning to our screens rather than inward. It is challenged by our culture of continual sharing. People who grew up with social media will often say that they don't feel like themselves unless they're posting, messaging, or texting. And even physical, born from a want of intimacy when we need it most in early childhood. Solitude, the capacity to be contentedly and constructively alone, is built from successful human connection at that time of childhood. But if we don't have experience with solitude, and this is often the case today, we start to equate loneliness with solitude. When we have a sense of our inner thoughts, not only do we have something to bring to conversation with others, but we're better able to empathize because we've already explored our own experiences deeply. It's true that our technology and our social media have done wonders for our sense of connectivity. I can read sound bites from hundreds of people that I've known throughout my life on Facebook and feel my love for them in a spontaneous moment. And through the convenience of a text, I can send a heart emoji to my wife in the middle of a workday. Or I can share my thoughts with a friend who's going through a tough time in a quick sentence or two. What's important to realize is that these posts and these texts are reminders of intimacy. They remind me are skills that can be learned and modeled. So how do we address the challenge of technology? The promise of technology is it makes things efficient. It saves time, it allows us to get things done. And our Torah affirms this pattern in describing the work of creation in the book of Genesis. But the Torah also speaks about Shabbat. Our screens, we can create the space to reflect and connect. As my cousin Tiffany Schlein writes in her book, 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week, Shabbat becomes the ultimate technology to make us the most creative, present, and productive version of ourselves. It's like a system update that keeps you running in an always-on world. Some of us are aware that companies are incentivized to glue our eyes to the screen. They call it monetizing eyeballs. And brain scans show that we exhibit the same compulsive brain patterns while online as we do when using some drugs. Clicking activates the same neural loops that narcotics do. We create the space for daydreaming and creativity. When we're spacing out, when our body is occupied with something else, like cleaning, bathing, doing any physical activity, knitting, then neuroscientists call this the default mode network. And when our brains are in that wandering mode, we imagine the future, reflect on memories, and think about other people's perspectives. There's no real structure to these thoughts. It's all a stream of consciousness, so our minds find connections between things that we didn't see as connected before. Us in based on everything it knows about us. And unfortunately, it knows a lot. There is also a scientific reason that spending time in nature makes us feel. Wolf, a cognitive neuroscientist at Tufts University, calls deep reading. Wolf had long observed students' fractured attention spans and began to study what skimming, scanning, and scrolling do to our ability to read with deep attention. Her thesis is that a life lived online makes deep reading more difficult. But if we create periods of uninterrupted reading for ourselves on Shabbat, make these blessings as a practice around our Shabbat meals, acknowledging that our food and our lives are a gift, then they can become ritual expressions of our gratitude. As cousin Tiffany writes about our technology, right now we've got this big brand new set of tools and we haven't figured out how to live with them yet. It's like we're pushing all this that inspires not only more long-term thinking, but also more appreciation of the simple joys of life. We can use Shabbat living and the skills it develops to work towards the future we want. While the internet can be an exhilarating idea accelerator, creating an atmosphere of thoughts, theories, and opinions, we need Shabbat mode. There's a reason why the Torah says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. Guard Shabbat and keep it holy. It uses the word guard because in every age and in every generation, there have been challenges to preserving this holy space. Our technology is just the latest iteration of the challenge that human beings have always had in cultivating our abilities for self-reflection, what we seek from one another. As we absorb the imagery of the high priest entering the Holy of Holies, and we consider the self-awareness and empathy that's necessary for that encounter, my hope and my prayer is that each one of us will consider how a Shabbat from technology
I do.
So I think it means that in order to, I think that
one answer is that you have to reflect upon yourself and be empathetic to yourself and aware of yourself in order to be empathetic with.
Been there, done that. Like, if you haven't experienced it, I mean, you're kind of looking from the outside in, and it's like, you're hearing the other person's situation, but you're not really relating to it because you haven't been there and done that. So I think you have to kind of, walk the walk or whatever. I mean, it's, that's just my opinion.
We really understand that there's something unseen in most people. And so you have to kind of step back. Sometimes somebody says, well, that person was really mean to me. They flipped off to me, verbally. Maybe they just had a loss. Maybe they were really sick. And these things we don't know as we travel through our day. And it's sort of an eye-opener to be more sensitive to what other people might be going through that even they may not know.
Thank you.
They'll have this, scatterbrain kind of, you can't pay attention to anything for very long. And so you have to cultivate that ability. And by paying attention to yourself, at least you could start to cultivate that ability. Then you can do that by paying attention to other people when you're talking to them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I get a sense that that having this self-awareness makes you feel more confident.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, because you know yourself, you can put yourself aside and be open to someone else. Anyone else on that question? Shall we move to question 2? Okay, question 2. How do you notice your relationship with smartphones, tablets, or computers getting in the way of meaningful connections with yourself and others? Okay. I do notice that I check my investments every morning.
Oh, sorry. So I, like many of you, use cell phones, but there are,
True sort of meaningful connections that existed before the technology came around. I mean, back in the day, like I know, like with my parents, when they were kids, going to on the weekend, they didn't really have much other than maybe a radio, and they would go and visit family and spend time.
Did anybody find, like, when the pandemic's like, there's an increase of all the stuff offered online so that you don't have time for yourself?
I totally agree with what Jeff said, that, sometimes you don't have to know when to turn it off because you're sitting there at breakfast with your spouse and you realize, oh, I'm checking my email or whatever. But I was thinking about what Jill said. I had a fantasy the other day that if I could go back in time, how much I would miss my cell phone, because that's what keeps me connected to my family. And back in the day, we all, looking around the room, we all lived in.
Message for anybody? If they didn't pick up?
Oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah. So I have to confess to everybody and God and whatever that I'm the worst on. Yeah, this is the right day. Technology. So one thing that I think is horrible is, like, Richard and I'll both be like like if I'm on my phone and I'm reading something from something and Richard wants to tell me something and he starts talking, I don't hear the beginning of what he's saying. I don't hear the subject. I don't know what he's talking about now. He's annoyed. I'm annoyed. Anyway, but that being said, I love technology, love it, and can't imagine being without it. But it's got to be controlled. That's it.
So that kind of leads us to the next question. But
I was just going to say, one of the things that I've noticed is that, and we have a former community back and a lot of friends back in Atlanta, and we've made a move like that before. When we moved from Miami to Atlanta, it was in the early cell phone days. So when the cell phones were the big life, we've been able to wish them a happy birthday and happy anniversary and all these kinds of things. but it's been really shallow. So we don't have that depth of communication. We don't have that depth of understanding about what's going on in their lives. And we only get that in great, in that kind of detail when we can actually go have face-to-face visits with them as we did recently. So.
Anybody else? Yeah.
So, the relationship with technology, and throughout last year, 5th grade, we used the technology a lot. If we couldn't go in person to some of our classes, like science, we would Zoom with our science teacher, Miss Joyle, and we would learn the lessons from there instead of just skipping science altogether. And in that case, it was very helpful technology rather than hurting us.
Thank you so much, Ethan. I'm reflecting on questions 1 and 2, and just as Ethan and others have pointed out, there's light and dark in every situation. There's good and bad, and same thing with the aspect of technology, positive and negative. And as we self-reflect, some thoughts that I've been having. So I just wanted to tie the self-reflection and technology so it can be both positive and negative, so that when we use technology, ask ourselves, am I using it consciously? Am I using it for my good? Am I using it for the greater good of those around me?
Thank you. I think that segues beautifully into the last question, which I think it means, when it says tech Shabbat, it means like tech-free Shabbat. How can you imagine a tech-free?
Been helpful in terms of those distractions, and I've got 3 different email accounts, including my business email account. I've got not only the regular social media, but I'm also on LinkedIn, and I have people from around the world that are reaching out at whatever time is convenient for them. And so these messages are constantly popping up, and it's like I feel like I need to respond. I'll forget about it if I don't. I've opened it up.
Nature, I really feel connected to myself and my intuition in a way that doesn't happen when I'm in my head with the dopamine kind of reactions and the cell phone and the social media. So I love the idea of taking a day to connect with myself and my intuition and hearing that inner voice.
Backpacking up in the Sierras, and when you're out in the middle of the Sierras, you have no connection to anything. And I actually enjoyed it. I was like, the kids, for them, I think it was more, they gave up a lot more than I did because they are more tech savvy. But we were gone for a few days and had no connection with the world, and it was really, I thought it was really refreshing. And it was funny, when we came back into town, we realized, oh my God, there was like this big fire in the Sierras, and people were asking, people were actually escaping to where we were to get away from the fires. And
cabin, and you had no internet service, no cell service. I was so happy, and it was so hard for my daughter and my husband. You get used to it. But they were never really thrilled about it. But there's something about being out in nature. You don't need any of that. And I get a different kind of feeling when I'm out in nature.
Go to Chabad. Anybody else?
I think it's just refreshing to be here. Like Shabbat here kind of forces us to be not